On this Thursday night, Ontario's healthcare action plan. The remedy drawing mixed reviews.
We're horrified at some of these plans.
And the issue that still needs attention, the struggle to keep cool.
It is hot. I have no idea how they're even surviving.
The rising risk of rising temperatures indoors. New pressure to lift the lid. What unsealing the Trump search affidavit could reveal. Plus, stitching symbols of Ukraine's resilience and resistance. The Canadian connection to a viral meme that evolved into a powerful brand.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. For months, doctors, nurses, and patients across the country have been sounding the alarm about the state of our healthcare system. They've been calling on the federal and provincial governments to do more to address the ongoing crisis. Today, the Ontario government responded with a plan to help the system recover ahead of what's expected to be a winter surge. But as Mike Drolet explains in our top story tonight, many frontline healthcare workers say they're worried the plan includes private solutions to public problems.
Understaffed and overwhelmed, Ontario's healthcare system has needed triage for months. And while the Ontario government has refused to call it a crisis, meaningful action was promised.
This plan is already in motion.
To add healthcare workers and free up hospital beds, Doug Ford's government says it will divert patients from ERs by allowing some surgeries in private clinics, waive the exam and registration fees for international and retired nurses, and move patients from hospitals to long-term care facilities.
Underwhelmed would be sort of an understatement. We're horrified at some of these plans.
The Ontario Health Coalition is particularly worried about moving seniors unwillingly to long-term care facilities that may be far from home.
Ultimately, no, we are not going to be forcing anybody out of a home, but the changes do allow us to continue that conversation.
However, seniors can also be transferred to temporary care homes until their preferred location opens up.
If we need to, we'll ask the Human Rights Commissioner to get involved and make a ruling, because this is serious.
One part of the plan that's drawn praise is the financial support aimed at hiring more international and retired nurses.
When you think of new immigrants, you could well imagine $1,500 is pretty significant. So with that kind of economic support, we may well be able to get more IENs into the workforce, or certainly that's the hope.
600 international nurses have been hired so far this year in Ontario, and another 400 are on the way. But it's far short of the 20,000 the Health Coalition says are needed in Ontario hospitals right now. The health minister sidestepped questions around what healthcare professionals say is the biggest recruiting hurdle, Bill 124, which caps wage increases for nurses at 1%.
It's rather cynical that despite all the intense scrutiny, the government is clinging on to this policy. It's kind of chilling that the one thing the government could do that would improve the morale and spirit of nurses across this province who are leaving in droves their jobs is to address Bill 124.
The minister did say more changes are on the way, but those actually on the front lines know this is a crisis that can't afford to wait. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Much of Western Canada is getting scorched by another heat wave. While stretches of extremely hot, dry weather are increasing across Canada, they're happening more frequently in the north and in the west. Exposure to extreme heat can have major impact on people, with vulnerable Canadians at greater risk. But as Lauren Pullen reports, it's not just outdoor temperatures that are cause for concern.
At splash parks, on beaches, along rivers and lakes, Western Canadians are doing what they can to cool off and cope.
The weather has been hot and dry.
We're very thankful that we're lucky enough to have air conditioning, but otherwise just trying to stay as close to the water as possible.
The heat has taken hold in most of Western Canada, nearly all of Alberta in the red under a heat warning, and parts of BC started the day the same way, with temperatures forecast to peak as high as 35 in Metro Vancouver, 40 in the BC interior, and topping 30 in southern Alberta.
It certainly gets dangerous when we see these heat waves lasting a number of days. Calgary, for example, is on day 10 being under a heat warning.
Extreme heat can turn deadly, something made alarmingly clear during last summer's heat dome. Heat-related deaths in Canada are a growing concern as heat waves become more common and more intense.
40.
And the fear is here for the most vulnerable.
It is hot. I have no idea how they're even surviving in there.
Western Canadian farmers are also feeling the heat with livelihoods on the line.
It adds a lot of stress to you. This year was looking encouraging, but there's such a deficit of moisture in the soil that we have nothing to rely on for any dry spells.
But the threat from scorching weather doesn't stop at your front door.
The key message is that indoor temperatures matter, and they matter a lot. People don't die because it's too hot outside. They die because it's too hot inside.
And while more and more Western Canadians turn to AC as their new norm, for those without that option, cooling stations offer a safe escape when the mercury hits dangerous highs. There is a reprieve in the forecast for parts of BC, but Alberta is not so lucky, with heat warnings expected for at least the next few days. Lauren Pullen, Global News, Calgary.
Pope Francis says there is insufficient evidence for the church to begin a full investigation into sexual assault allegations against Quebec Cardinal Marc Drolet, one of Canada's highest-ranking Catholic leaders. Earlier this week, the allegations were made public when a class action lawsuit was filed in Quebec Superior Court. A woman identified as F accused Drolet of several incidents of sexual assault between 2008 and 2010. Last year, after the woman alerted the Pope of her allegations, she was told that a preliminary investigation found no evidence to support her claims. That investigation was carried out by a senior Jesuit who is a close associate of Drolet. Drolet himself is close to Pope Francis. He was among the frontrunners to become Pope back in 2013. These accusations were contained in one of two class actions filed Tuesday, in which more than 200 Quebec priests are accused of abuse. Reaction continues to pour in following a Global News exclusive that revealed medical assistance in dying was offered to a Canadian veteran looking for treatment for post-traumatic stress. Now calls are growing for an in-depth investigation into the incident, and more veterans are sounding the alarm over the organization tasked with helping former soldiers return after duty. Our Mercedes Stephenson has been following this reaction since breaking the news earlier this week. Mercedes, this story has really hit a nerve.
It sure has, Farah. I have heard from dozens and dozens of veterans who are outraged by this, and some of them knew about this before. It was really starting to pick up in the veterans community because they were so hurt and felt so betrayed that somebody who was seeking help, who was on the upswing according to many friends who are close to him, who I've spoken to, in his mental health and his physical health, and then suddenly this happens. It speaks to the lack of trust that a lot of veterans have in the system. They believe the government would rather see them die than pay for them to live. That is not borne out by what we're seeing in terms of the facts, and we have to keep in mind that in that particular scenario, it was a one offer to that veteran, which we're still investigating. But the fact that this is how it would feel to them says a lot about how they feel the government is treating them and a lot about how they feel Canadians feel about them. And that raises serious questions about the system.
Mercedes, I mean, how well is the system working for veterans right now?
Well, veterans will tell you largely that it's not working very well, but there's some numbers to back up that perception. The Auditor General says that the Canadian government needs to have a long-term strategy to resource Veterans Affairs Canada properly. We know that they're supposed to finish claims and assess them within 16 weeks, but that's not actually happening. On average, it's double that length of time. 37 weeks, Farah, to assess a claim. That's almost, pardon me, it's just over 9 months. And if you're somebody who's waiting for that money because you're unable to work due to an injury sustained in your service to the Canadian Forces, vets organizations say it could be the difference between making rent and not making rent. There's also the lack of continuity in cases. Veterans are assigned veteran caseworkers, but they say they continue to change. There's no continuity. And in this particular situation we were talking about, it was only the second time that that Veterans Affairs Service agent had engaged with that vet. So there's just really no sense of continuity and of ensuring that they are having that ongoing care and those home visits. So they certainly need more people in the system, according to both veterans and the Auditor General.
Still lots of questions on this one. Mercedes Stephenson in Calgary. Thank you, Mercedes. Is the federal government qualified to protect our privacy while handling national security threats? Well, most Canadians don't think so. That's according to a poll done for the government and obtained by Global News through a Freedom of Information request. As Tom Vernon explains, with global conflicts being fought more and more in the online realm, our information has become a target.
The conveniences of a modern world come with a cost. We're all essentially connected at all times, but that can also make us targets. Not just individual Canadians, but as part of Canada's national security as a whole. To fight back, police and spy agencies use these tools as well, but the technology is changing so rapidly, a parliamentary committee will review Canada's communications intercept policies, what limitations the rules might have on the gathering end, and potential risks to privacy rights changing the rules might have. This review comes as the government tests the water on Canadians' attitudes about how the government handles personal information. A poll of 1,000 Canadians commissioned by the Privy Council Office, obtained by Global News through a Freedom of Information request, found only 1/3 of respondents are confident the government shares information responsibly in order to respond to national security threats. When asked if they felt comfortable with the government getting greater information sharing powers, even if it affects their privacy rights, 50% of the respondents disagreed, while only 3 in 10 would be okay with it.
We have to be wary of the false dichotomy of security versus privacy.
Privacy lawyer Constantine Carbaliotis says this is an important conversation, and he's never seen any evidence of privacy rights getting in the way of national security. Privacy and the police have been front and center in recent weeks. In June, the RCMP admitted to using spyware on 49 devices in up to 32 cases between 2017 and this year. This gave the force a range of tools, from reading text messages to listening in on device microphones and even activating cameras. They were only able to do this with explicit authorization from a judge, although Canada's Privacy Commissioner was never informed of its use. Carbaliotis says that leads to obvious concerns.
If there is really no harm, why didn't you do a privacy impact assessment? Why didn't you submit it to the commissioner? These are the ways in which we make sure that we balance the risks against the needs.
Law enforcement and spy agencies say there are risks in the world. It will be up to Ottawa to determine what private information those organizations need to protect Canadians. Tom Vernon, Global News, Edmonton.
One wolf has died and another is still missing after at least a dozen escaped from their enclosure at the Greater Vancouver Zoo on Tuesday. This is the first update from the zoo, located in Aldergrove, BC, since it became public that the wolves got out. Officials say one wolf was found dead on the side of the road, and another, only a year old, is still missing. Police are investigating a possible human factor in the escape after finding a hole cut in the fence. But this next story proves there is still good in the world. Beachgoers in Toronto dropped everything and acted fast to look for a missing child. Lifeguards and people on Toronto's Woodbine Beach worked together last weekend when an 8-year-old boy was thought to be missing. You can see they formed a human chain into Lake Ontario and started their search. Fortunately, the boy was not in the water. He was lost on land and was safely reunited with his family. Legal issues keep piling on former U.S. President Trump. Coming up, the push to publicize the affidavit leading to the search of his home. Plus, watch out, it's a bull in a Peruvian shop. While questions continue to swirl about what was exactly in those highly classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, a U.S. judge has signaled he's willing to unseal parts of the affidavit supporting the search warrant on former President Donald Trump's Florida home. But how the government knew what to look for and where is still a closely guarded secret, one that might not be revealed in the weeks to come. Our Jackson Proska reports on the latest in a long list of legal woes facing Trump.
In a compromise meant to protect sensitive information, a Florida judge ordered the U.S. government to redact portions of the affidavit used in the search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, all for possible release. Lawyers for the Justice Department revealed their investigation is still in its early stages.
It would certainly give insight and reveal what the DOJ is investigating, how they know what they know, where they've been looking.
In court filings, justice officials warned releasing the affidavit would serve as a roadmap to the government's ongoing investigation. DOJ lawyers say they're deeply concerned about the safety of witnesses whose participation led to the recovery of 11 sets of classified documents from Trump's home.
Tell us the predicate for the warrant. Reveal the affidavit. This is too important to democracy.
Can we have a word? But the former president and his allies have insisted the underlying reasons for the search warrant should be public. Trump's lawyers notably did not intervene to support the unsealing.
But Trump faces legal jeopardy on multiple fronts. Federal prosecutors have issued a grand jury subpoena for all of the White House documents turned over to the January 6th committee. They're investigating the role of Trump and his allies in the attack on the Capitol.
Alan, any message for Donald Trump?
In New York, Alan Weisselberg, the former chief financial officer at the Trump Organization, pleaded guilty to conspiring with the company on a 15-year tax fraud. He'll spend 5 months in prison in exchange for testifying at an upcoming trial into the business practices of Trump's namesake company. And this week in Georgia, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani testified before a grand jury, part of a criminal investigation into election interference in the state.
I'm not going to comment on the grand jury investigation.
The latest moves by the court in Florida suggest prosecution is not necessarily imminent over the mishandling of classified documents. But it's clear Trump's legal troubles are far from over. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Almost 4 years after he was found bludgeoned to death in his prison cell, charges have now been laid in the killing of notorious gangster James Whitey Bulger. 3 men, including a mafia hitman, have been indicted on conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. 2 of the accused were already behind bars. Bulger was one of America's most infamous mob bosses. He was number 2 on the FBI's most wanted list, behind Osama bin Laden, before his arrest in 2011. Unprecedented sentence ahead. Why this woman is being imprisoned for her social media posts. A bombing at a mosque in the Afghan capital of Kabul has left at least 21 people dead and wounded more than 30 others. Heightened security can be seen around the mosque 1 day after the deadly blast ripped through the facility during evening prayers. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but the Islamic State has said it's responsible for similar attacks carried out in recent months. There are fears the death toll could rise as several of the injured, including children, are still in the hospital. A Saudi court has sentenced a women's rights advocate to 34 years in prison for posting critical tweets, and the ruling is drawing outrage around the world. Salma al-Shahab was detained during a family vacation last year, just days after she planned to return to the United Kingdom. Now, before the trip, she tweeted or retweeted several messages calling for reforms in Saudi Arabia and the release of activists. A terrorism tribunal convicted al-Shahab of helping dissidents and publishing false rumors. The unusually harsh sentence comes amid Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's crackdown on critics. 3 days of heavy rain has caused major damage to roads and homes on New Zealand's South Island. An atmospheric river has brought more than 300 millimeters of rain in just the past 24 hours. Several rivers have burst their banks, submerging roads and homes, and dozens of mudslides have also come down. So far, more than 300 homes have been evacuated, and a severe weather warning is still in place as another significant rainfall is in the forecast. And at least 6 people are dead and at least 20 people were hurt after a powerful storm battered the French Mediterranean island of Corsica. Heavy rain and wind gusts topping 220 kilometers per hour swept across the island, uprooting trees and damaging homes across the popular tourist destination. As many as 40,000 homes and businesses are without power, and more rain's expected over the next 24 hours. A chaotic scene was caught on camera in the Peruvian capital of Lima after a bull slated for the slaughterhouse got loose and caused a panic. The frightened animal sent people running after escaping from the truck it was being transported in. The bull tore through shops and reportedly injured at least 1 person. It was eventually caught by locals in the area some 40 minutes after its capture. The meme that gained huge momentum. Next, the Canadian behind a powerful new brand in Ukraine. It started as a meme, a symbol that pairs a traditional Orthodox religious icon with a high-tech tank-killing missile. Now, a Canadian with Ukrainian roots has turned St. Javelin into a brand. And high-profile figures, including Ukraine's president, have been spotted wearing the armed figure. As Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Gamansing reports, St. Javelin is now hard at work, raising both morale and money for the Ukrainian cause.
A meme turned lifeline.
Somebody's there at the front for us, and we are here for them.
Victoria Radenko and all the seamstresses working on the St. Javelin line know their products help fund the Ukrainian armed forces. To say it is a labor of love doesn't begin to scratch the surface.
I have a son-in-law. He's near Donetsk. Sometimes the illusion is created that everything is fine, and the work distracts us, because if we were left with ourselves, it would be much harder.
Baseline is one of several Ukrainian businesses contracted to produce items under the St. Javelin brand. A former journalist in Toronto with Ukrainian roots, Christian Bors, started it with a borrowed image of the Madonna. From a few stickers to a Canadian storefront, St. Javelin has brought in roughly $1.2 million. In Ukraine, St. Javelin is now an icon of the war, a symbol of Ukrainian resistance.
One of the aim was to find manufacturers that are in areas that need help, that were affected by the war. If you can help, you help.
This printing facility in Dnipro has turned out about 1,700 T-shirts. A big change from the days of filling Molotov cocktails on the production floor. One of the project managers is also a soldier.
I think this is very cool, and once again, I am convinced that the entire civilized world has rallied around Ukraine.
A morale booster with a Canadian connection being shipped around the world. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, Kyiv.
And that's it for Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is this herd of dairy cows in Vibank, Saskatchewan. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us your pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.